So welcome everybody. On behalf of the KIX EAP Hub, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland, KIX stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. It's a multi-year project funded by the Global Partnership for Education, GPE, and it is administered by IDRC, International Development Research Center in Ottawa, Canada. In total, there are 4 hubs, 2 in Africa, 1 in Central Latin America, and we are administering and coordinating the hub for the region that comprises 21 countries, Europe, Asia, Pacific, and Yemen and Sudan. And because this is a cluster of very diverse countries, we always offer the webinars in 3 languages, plus closed captions. So English, there's a cluster of countries that are Russian speaking and Arab speaking. We realize that there are many more languages, so we apologize that we cannot provide more languages, but at least we have 3 languages. The partners of KIX EAP are ACER in Australia, FHI 360 in the US, Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, UNESCO Bangkok, who is the host this time, and UNICEF Regional Office in Geneva, but we also collaborate closely with UNESCO IIP in Paris. About the topic, in April, we had a survey in the region in the 21 countries, and there was a great turnout and response rate. And we asked, what are the kind of topics you're working on? What are the topics you're interested in? And one of the topics that very clearly came across is exactly the topic that UNESCO Bangkok now is offering. It is the gap that exists in curriculum reform between what is on paper and what is in practice. And on paper, many countries in the region had competency-based reform. Sometimes it's called standards-based reform, sometimes it's called outcomes-based education, where the focus is on describing and defining competencies for each grade level and each subject matter. However, sometimes there's only a curriculum framework, but no detailed standards. Sometimes the tests lag behind for students, sometimes the textbooks, sometimes teacher education. So it is one of those so-called traveling reforms that, however, is not fully implemented, and there's a lot of confusion and inconsistency. So we are very happy that UNESCO Bangkok, who is a leader in education reform in the region, is working on this topic and is presenting together with their partners in the region on the topic. Maybe I should stop here. If you want to comment, it would be nice if you rename yourself in the in Zoom and add the country where you're from, so when you speak later on or comment, that we all know where you're based. Having said this, I'm very pleased to pass the floor to José Luis Canellas. He is our hub manager for the whole region, and he will present the panelists and presenters for today's session. So welcome again to the 5th webinar of KIX EAP.
Thank you, Professor Gita Steiner-Ramsey, for your welcoming words and for setting the background to our 5th webinar of the KIX EAP webinar series for this year. Before we move into the outline of the session, this is our Twitter hashtag, so please feel free to hashtag us on Twitter about our event today. Partner in our today's webinar. Over to you, Mark.
José Luis, thank you very much for that great introduction and overview of the agenda. A big thank you to Professor Gita Steiner-Ramsey and all of the people at the KIX EAP Hub for welcoming us and to allowing us this opportunity to share some of the country initiatives, challenges, and responses to curriculum implementation It's a big challenge and many countries are doing it. Very quickly, before we begin, and before I get to the two speakers, I'd like to give a bit of background about UNESCO Bangkok and our work. So I'd like to share with you first, I'm here today representing UNESCO Bangkok, but more importantly, we're representing what we call NECMAP, which is the Network on Education Quality Monitoring in Asia Pacific. We have 57 different member institutes across Asia and Pacific region, which is 49 different institutions and 8 individuals. And in our discussion today, we're pleased to have at least three or four of the speakers today from our NECMAP network. You can download more information there or visit our website. Our vision and mission is to promote strong education systems in Asia Pacific and working together through collaborative efforts. Some of the ways we do that. This gives a quick overview of our main goals. We look at system alignment across curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And we also focus on competency-based learning outcomes. And so we're pleased to share some of our member institutes' efforts today. The network, which is coordinated here at UNESCO Bangkok, looks at this through knowledge sharing, research and analysis, and capacity development workshops. And just before I end this quick introduction, I'd like to highlight our most recent capacity development initiative, which has been an online course. Usually we do our capacity development workshops in person, but of course, under the current environment and climate due to COVID-19, we've transitioned quite successfully into an online modality. Partnering with the Australia Council for Educational Research, we've introduced a 3-week online course that looks at how to integrate 21st century skills or competencies, these broad range of competencies that we're talking about. And we're pleased to have over 85 participants from 16 plus countries in the Asia Pacific region currently taking this course. And 2 of those are here today with us. Please, if people have questions or comments for either of these 2 speakers, please type them into the chat box below. Next, I'd like to turn it over to our colleagues from Vietnam, Duong Thi to Hoang, to tell us a little bit about the efforts that they have taken in Vietnam in implementing competency-based learning. Hoang?
Yes. Greetings from Vietnam. My name is Nguyen. I'm currently working at Vietnam Institute of Educational Sciences. Thanks, NEMA, for giving me the opportunity to participate in the webinar and exchange experience on competency-based learning in Vietnam, as well as learn from other countries. First of all, I would like to share a little bit about the Vietnamese context. If you have observed Vietnam, you will know that we are in the process of educational reform. Vietnam's new curriculum was enacted in 2018 and officially implemented with grade 1 in this school year, and we continue with grade 2 and 6 in the next year. As a result, we are struggling with the transition from the traditional approach commonly known as content-based curriculum into competency-based curriculum. This poses a lot of challenges for us. In the past, our teachers only focus on teaching knowledge to students. Now they have to both teach knowledge and develop their students' competencies and values. And the latter are the main purposes of the new general education curriculum. So what has Vietnam been doing up to now? I think it can be said that competency-based education has been covered in our policy, curriculum, and somewhat in teacher training. Firstly, we have changed the purposes of general education in the policy on education. Vietnamese education needs to create a learning environment that encourages students to develop both physically and mentally in harmony, and help a student to become active and confident learners who engage in career-oriented and lifelong learning. Secondly, we have reformed our curriculum so that we can achieve the new general education goals. In particular, the new general education curriculum focuses on the development of 5 values and 10 core competencies for students. 5 values are patriotism, compassion, diligence, honesty, and responsibility. The 10 competencies are divided into 2 groups. One is general capabilities and the other is specialized capabilities. Our students develop 3 groups of general capabilities, including autonomy and self-learning, communication and collaboration, problem solving and creativity. Our students also learn 7 specialized capabilities, include language, calculation, science, technology, computing, aesthetics, and physics. Yeah. Thirdly, the new curriculum was built to emphasize increasing practice and application of knowledge to real life, and focusing on social activities, extracurriculum activities, and scientific research. The total number of subjects in the new curriculum 2018 is 13, which is less than the 17 subjects required by the former curriculum. In addition, the subject content does not have the structure of knowledge units, but rather topics that are close to real life. In addition to reducing curriculum topics, renewing methods of teaching and learning are also important new orientation in the development of general education in Vietnam today. However, our teachers have difficulty in updating their teacher methods due to limitation in teaching conditions that are the same in the other developing countries, such as large classes and lack of teaching equipment. Fourthly, using the competence approach for examination and assessment is also an important measure to innovate general education in Vietnam. The Ministry of Education and Training issued guiding documents on primary student assessment. Thus, demonstrates application of evaluation philosophy, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. According to these documents, our teacher needs to focus on both assessment, formative assessment and summative assessment. In addition, our students are involved in the assessment processes through self-assessment and peer assessment activities. As a 2018 curriculum just started in this school year with grade 1, our first grade teachers were trained on how to implement the new curriculum and new textbook. In reality, teacher training in Vietnam had many obstacles. In addition to implementing a new competency-based curriculum, for the first time, schools in Vietnam have more than one option of official textbook for their teachers and students to use. In fact, we are having difficulties in helping teachers to effectively teach and assess students' general abilities in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huong. That was great. A great overview of what you have been doing in Vietnam, describing the curriculum development that and how you've highlighted 5 values and the core competencies across the curriculum. I note early in your talk the challenge of moving from this content-based learning to competency-based learning, and all those challenges are well noted, and some of our listeners probably want to know more about how to overcome that. I think some questions are coming through on that. So I think before we take up too much more time, maybe I'll ask our colleagues from KIX EAP Hub. Marina, would you like to highlight maybe some of the questions for?
Absolutely. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So I would like to start by asking Elena Volkova from Uzbekistan to pose her question orally, if that is possible.
The first one or the second one? Hello.
Hi, Elena.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, I think the first one is pretty straightforward. You're asking about the level of education which they were focusing on, right?
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
So if you can elaborate more on that.
Right.
And the
I'm
second
just,
one.
Yeah. I'm listening and thinking the competence-based learning, is it applied in which sector of education? Are we talking about higher education? Are we talking about secondary education? Because we have similar reforms in Uzbekistan, and it's just interesting the context of other countries.
Maybe I can probably answer that for both of the two speakers. I believe both were referring to basic education, i.e. K to 12 or however your basic education. But that's not to say that these competency-based learning frameworks or efforts don't apply to higher education. So I think that there's a lot of lessons that what the speakers have been saying apply to any level of education. But of course, with some slight moderation or alteration.
If we may continue on this topic, we received also a question from Hudra Adhikari asking if training is enough for teachers on competency-based curriculum, or teacher preparation and development in the university is needed for this as well.
Thank you, Marina. Maybe we'll ask Huang to try and respond to that one. How have you been training your teachers for the new competency-based curriculum and so on?
As I mentioned above, we are on the process and still have many things to do. In my opinion, in order to ensure the competency-based learning is aligned across curriculum, teaching, and assessment, it's first necessary to build a developmental framework. But one of shortcomings of our Vietnamese curriculum is lack of detailed description of general capabilities, including their definitions, structures, and learning continuum, learning progressions. We are currently trying to build such framework for problem solving and creativity, collaboration and communication. And because of this shortcoming, it is very difficult for our teachers to teach and assess the general capability. And what about teacher training? Because new curriculum just started this school year, so we only train our first our first grade teacher for implementing the new curriculum and new textbook. But I think that we have many things to do, and our teacher now can lack of knowledge to teach and assess a student general ability in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Wang. Just let's get a last question before we move on with the presentations. We have received some very nice questions, so maybe we will be able to cover them in the next round of Q&A. But let's go for our last question. I'll ask the speakers to address that shortly. So we received this question from Bangladesh, from Pratap Shiv, who asks how the process or workflow for the development of competency standards work.
Of course, please follow along in the chat, and you guys can input any additional information that you may not have had a chance to during the very short time that we had. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing from the UNICEF Regional Office of South Asia, Frank Van Kapel, and two colleagues in Bangladesh and Bhutan who are going to give the short interventions on their initiatives. Frank, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today from Kathmandu, and it's really nice to see so many familiar names among the participants. So in this session, we'll be looking at learning frameworks in South Asia, and as Mark mentioned, we have two country presentations. We have one from Bangladesh by Iqbal Hussain, UNICEF Education Specialist, and one from Bhutan by Arjun Kumar Gurung, who is an education assessment specialist at the Bhutan Council for School Examinations and Assessments. So Iqbal will be presenting on the comprehensive adolescent skills framework developed in Bangladesh, and Arjun will present on assessing 21st century competencies in the Bhutan National Education Assessment Framework. For the next few minutes though, let me provide a little bit of the South Asian context, looking especially at the assessment dimension. And in the meantime, feel free to put anything in the chat. And I saw there's lots of great questions already in the chat, and some of those we might also be able to look at in the Q&A for this session. Next, please. So okay, this is a map here. Yeah. So since the 1960s, many countries have participated in international or regional cross-national assessment globally. And you see here a lot of countries in green. That's those who have participated in multiple cross-national assessments. And that's the case for countries in most regions, at least since the 1990s. But if you look at South Asia, that shaded in gray in the map, what you will notice is that there has not been that much participation in cross-national assessments. In fact, Bhutan participated in PISA for Development last year, Pakistan in the TIMSS cross-national assessment, and that was the first time really in the region. And there's been a few countries that have participated in the ASER assessments, which are citizen-led assessments, and they look specifically at foundational literacy and numeracy. But in general, conduct of large-scale assessments is very, very new in the region, at least according to international standards and methodologies. And the ones that you see here, the cross-national assessments, typically they focused on literacy, numeracy, and science, but now they are increasingly integrating or focusing on 21st century skills, such as critical thinking, communication, creative thinking, collaborative problem solving, and so on, which can be a lot harder to measure. So there's a great need in our region for capacity building on assessment, including large-scale assessments, but also in the classroom, on formative assessments, and integration of 21st century skills, which is an additional challenge. But as COVID is demonstrating, it is possible to leapfrog. There's now huge momentum around 21st century skills, around digital skills, skills for employability, globally, but also and especially, I should say, in South Asia, with governments, with UNICEF and partners such as Generation Unlimited, which focuses especially on skills development for youth. Next slide, please. So 21st century skills and competency-based education and learning, they are very much on the agenda throughout the South Asia region. Even before COVID, in meetings with ministries of education, with UNICEF colleagues and partners, discussions were often focusing on moving away from remote learning, addressing the learning crisis, but also on 21st century skills development for adolescents especially, which Iqbal will speak about in the next presentation, and also developing and reforming national assessment systems to incorporate 21st century skills, which Arjun will speak about in his presentation. Besides also the need to reform curriculum, improving teacher training, and above all, improving teaching and learning in the classroom, which is what it all comes down to. So in January next year, we are launching a platform called ACLAP, All Children Learning Assessment Platform, which we'll do with key partners such as UNESCO and the World Bank. And we have been working on the platform for the last 2 years, developing guidance and tools to build capacity around all aspects of assessment, including also 21st century skills assessment. And the intention is to address the capacity gap mentioned earlier, but also to leapfrog ahead, for the needs of the 21st century. These guidance and skills and these guidances and tools are now being adapted to the COVID context. And next year, we will especially be focusing on 21st century skills assessment and zooming into the classroom level, incorporating guidance and tools for formative assessments. So how can teachers use assessments to better understand where their children are, how they can catch up on lost learning during the school closures? How can we support these teachers with guidance, tools, even mobile apps, which enable them to monitor and improve their students' learning? And it's important to note that good formative assessment ideally promotes the building of 21st century skills, such as self-reflection, critical thinking, including about one's own work, and collaboration with peers. But this will require quite a radical shift in how most teachers typically teach and assess in the classroom in our region. So in building back better when schools have reopened, this will be a key focus. So with that background and context, let me just hand over now to my colleague, Iqbal Hussain from UNICEF Bangladesh, who has focused especially in his work on skills-based education and alternative learning pathways for young children. So over to you, Iqbal.
Thanks, Frank, and welcome all the participants. So I will quickly share the journey of like integrating transferable skills or soft skills or 21st century skills, whatever we are talking about, into the formal national education curriculum. So yeah, the objective initially that we started to work with government in 2017, 2018 on how to integrate the soft skills or transferable skills into the national curriculum. But then the issues that came at the time was, next slide, please. So issue at the time came was like, what are the skills and how to integrate? So these two questions actually came up with, and then with the government under the leadership of National Curriculum and Textbook Board, with the UNICEF support, we started to explore the whole idea of like how to conceptualize skills considering the country context and how we can come up with the country specific skill need and the integration process. So we started the journey in 2018 involving more than 27 agencies who are somehow working with the skills integration or life skills or in the name of different skills. And we realized at the time that the understanding of skills and competencies were a bit different among the people. So initially the decisions came out from the interaction, technical exercise, that let's go for a skill framework first for the country that we really want to integrate. And that exercise will give us more detail. And the idea was like to work closely with the National Curriculum and Textbook Board under their leadership, so that at the same time we explore, we came up with the framework and the capacity also build up to integrate and influence the national curriculum. So from that point of view, this slide is actually giving the overview of the adolescent skills framework that we have come up with through more than 1 year technical exercise involving multi-sectoral people and multi-agency people. And that is the, like you see the 10 core skills that we identified for Bangladesh. It is like creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, communication, collaboration, global citizenship, employability, and self-management, including foundational skills. And the right hand side, you will see that for each of the core skills that we have identified, actually we go deeper. We identified the more detail of guiding skills for each of the core skills, so that we can unpack those when we are working with the curriculum framework. Next slide, please. So all the detail will be there in the presentation. I'm not going on the item, but maybe I'll give you the story, how we conceptualize it. So the skill framework conceptualized in few ways to make it more detailed, to support for integration into the curriculum and assessment. So core skills like the root, and then each of the core skills was unpacked among few guiding skills, and then for each of the guiding skills we again unpack to make it to a performing skills, that is observable and measurable behavior or cognitive abilities or action, that performance that visualize a guiding skill. So to visualize the guiding skills, we broken down the guiding skill again to the performing skills at the behavioral and observable level. And even for each of the performing skills, there are phase like elementary to the upgraded level, so that we have a clear pathways that how to actually support learners to build up those skills. So this was the conceptualization of the skill framework. And just want to see next slide, please. Want to share with you that how this 1.5 year exercise actually help us a lot to influence the national curricular framework. First of all, earlier the curricular framework was not competency based. Only the primary curriculum framework was competency based, but the secondary was not. But with that exercise, there is a huge common understanding and momentum created to come up with a unified national curriculum from pre-primary to grade 12, integrating all those skills that we have identified, because there were much confident among the people, among the professional and among the government also, as we unpack everything while we work for the skill framework. And that actually influenced, and this is the current latest framework that we are talking about, just came out from the government side for public comments, and UNICEF is closely working with that. So the change focus, you can see that from knowledge to experience, from content to concept, from subject to interdisciplinary approach, teaching to facilitating, prescriptive to inquiry based, learner as receiver as learner as creator, standardization to diversification, institution-based learning to learning at anywhere, academic to life and livelihood, certificate-based to performance record-based, and from abstract to application-based. From that point of view, actually the competence is defined as values, attributes, knowledge, and skills. And for each of the element of competencies, there are huge detailed work and identified the values that we want to promote, the attributes that we want to see among our children, the knowledge that we want to really nurture, and definitely the skill, as I mentioned earlier, the skill for learning to learn, skill for personal empowerment, skill for practical and social life, and skill foundational skills. So these 4 type of skills are actually came up from that skill framework that I have shared. And finally, now the national framework actually proposed competency-based education, experiential learning pedagogy as a key principle of pedagogy, interdisciplinary approach within that. So you will see that now the 5 subjects are coming from the classical subject from 10 learning areas, and 5 are thematic subjects. And definitely for a competence and skill-based curriculum, you need formative assessment to be dominated. So that also came up. So this is a huge reform in Bangladesh. These 4 approach came into the curricular framework, national curricular framework, with a specific focus on equity, diversity, connectivity, and humanity. And this framework is now opened by the government, and we are closely supporting government on that. And one of the key challenges that are discussed at this moment is transferring this curriculum into practice, because considering all the structure and everything. So considering that, we are closely working with the government at this moment to come up with an interim package from 2021 that will reflect some of the flavor of this curriculum approach, so that from 2022 the new curriculum and new approach can be introduced by the government, and government has a plan for 7 years to gradually translate this and implement this whole curriculum from K to 12 with this new framework, under the new framework. And that's in a very short way, the small journey that we started in 2018 January with the skill framework that gradually influenced the whole national curricular framework, and now the whole education reform also. So I can stop here now because time is short, but I can more elaborate in the question and answer sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iqbal, for sharing this really interesting work around the skills framework and how it influenced the new curriculum and education reform more broadly, and the work with government and many different partners. Our next speaker is Arjun Kumar Gurung, as mentioned, education assessment specialist in Bhutan, and he will speak about assessing 21st century competencies in the National Education Assessment Framework of Bhutan. So over to you, Arjun. Might want to check your mic if it's unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, great. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in different part of the world. I'm Arjun Kumar Gurung from Bhutan Council for School Examination Assessment. It's my pleasure to be talking to you on assessment of 21st century skills in NEAF, in National Education Assessment Framework Bhutan, in the context of GNS. So as Frank said, I will be discussing on National Education Assessment Framework of Bhutan. How have we tried to measure 21st century skills in our National Education Assessment Framework. Recently, we have launched a book. This is the book. I think everybody can see this.
Yes.
So this is a National Education Assessment Framework, which we have developed involving a lot of stakeholders. And then we have technical partners, ISA India, Delhi. So this framework is aligned with our national philosophy of gross national happiness, our strategic framework, our aspirations of Bhutan, and also other document that spelled out clearly the aspiration of our children. So, and also this framework is very robust because we have involved a lot of stakeholders, the local stakeholders, the international stakeholders, as well as we have also involved the international experts, and we have reviewed the OECD's PISA framework, the TIMSS framework, and the regional framework of other countries. So in terms of robustness, in terms of technically correct, this is very good framework. But well, there are so many salient features of this framework, but the one thing that I want to discuss here today would be how do we measure 21st century's competencies from the context of Bhutan using this NEAF. Now, can we share my slide, please? Yeah. Okay. So you can see on the slide, there are basically there are 9 attributes. These attributes are clearly articulated in our Bhutan education blueprint document. These aspirations are derived from our gross national happiness philosophy, our development philosophy of Bhutan, GNS philosophy, and also the SMASTIS vision for youth of Bhutan. So these are very, these are the milestone for us to enhance our framework in terms of measuring, in terms of contextualizing and then localizing the 21st century in terms of Bhutan. So if you look in this document, you can see there are 9 attributes. The first one is knowledge and understanding. The second one is intellectual competency. Third one is communicative competency. The fourth one, enduring habit of lifelong learning. Fifth one, community, family, community, and national happiness, national values. Sixth one, spirituality and character. The seventh, physical well-being. The eighth, leadership competency. 9, world readiness. So when you talk about knowledge and understanding here, we're not talking only about the knowledge of oneself, but we're also talking about factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, epistemic knowledge, and a meta-cognition knowledge. And when you're talking about intellectual competencies, we are talking about critical thinking, problem solving, all this. So these are the attributes that we really wanted to measure in the context of 21st century. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So maybe you can go to the larger slide. So in the next slide, what you can see is the mapping. So what we have done in our framework is we have developed this framework, and in the framework we have this domain: reading literacy, the scientific literacy, mathematical literacy, speaking literacy, listening literacy, digital literacy, social science literacy. So these are sort of tools that we are using in our approach to measure 9 attributes, and that actually is again mapped to 21st century transversal competencies as defined by UNESCO Bangkok. So you can see there, we have tried to map those. For example, in using those literacies such as literacy, scientific literacies, reading literacies, and mathematical literacies, where we will be trying to measure interpersonal skills and interpersonal skills, and using even using the contextual questionnaires and also some observation tools. Will be also be measuring the other skills such as physical well-being, the world readiness, and then femininity, community values, and the other soft skills that are aspired in the framework. So we can see those are overlapping, but we can still see that we will try to measure all these skills, and we will try to map against 21st century skills of UNESCO Bangkok. So having all that, what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day, what you're looking at is we're trying to achieve the vision of Bhutan, which is an educated and enlightened society of Jainis built and sustained on the unique values of Tha, Damjik, and Lijuti. So what we're trying to do here is, while we try to embrace the global competencies, we also have some sort of competencies. And when we meet them and then we try to put it together, then we get this, we try to get a bigger vision of Bhutan. With this, the last thing here is what we're trying to do is we're trying to re-engineer our efforts. The bigger picture here is we are trying to re-engineer our assessment tools to better measure not only the content, but also 21st century competencies, and then without losing the essence of national aspirations, vision, and then the development philosophy of Bhutan. So with this, I end my session here. I would be happy to go for any questions that comes along the discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Ayun, for your great overview of 21st century skills measurement in the context of Bhutan and the unique approach that you have. We have lots of great questions in the chat, so let me straight away hand over to Marina for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have received a lot of great questions. We'll be able to address some of them, but we might also leave time in the end to address some that we won't have enough time now. So let me start by a question from Shehzad Jiva from Pakistan, and I believe this question is addressed to Iqbal from Bangladesh. So good to hear about the new direction. Will the country use the traditional platform to implement the framework, or is there a new approach to implement this framework? Secondly, what will be the cost, if you already know, per child to implement this framework to bring radical shift in education in your context?
Okay, so as I mentioned that the journey just started, and just recently, few days back, the framework was open for public comments, though it was developed through a huge consultation with all the stakeholders. So this is a framework. Now the further work is going on to make it the detailed curriculum and the detailed teaching learning process and materials, and definitely this type of reform will not come all of a sudden. From 2022, a gradual implementation will start. So it is not yet introduced, so cannot estimate at this moment, but there is a 7 years plan that how this will be gradually introduced from 2022 and then transform the whole system gradually, number one. And number two, from 2021, there is a plan to introduce an interim package to test this approach throughout the education system, to learn more about the teacher's capacity, to create the more orientation among the student, teachers, and education system, so that these findings can feed in the overall gradual implementation that will start from 2022. So I can stop here now. I think that's all.
Thank you. So let me ask now for Reshma from India to pose her question. She made a question in the previous Q&A session, but she would like to discuss that with you. Reshma,
Yes,
can you hear
hello.
us? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Marina. So, thank you to Bangladesh and Bhutan for sharing their experiences. I think it's very, very encouraging. So, I'm from a state in India called Maharashtra, where we also undertook the analysis of textbooks to look at whether life skills were incorporated in them, because we know that teachers use the textbook as the primary resource for teaching and might well be unaware of curriculum or syllabus in that regard, but use this almost like a Bible. So, using that as a starting point, we understood that there were a lot of gaps in even incorporating life skills teaching. And as we began that discussion with the government on revising textbooks, we understood that it was a very, very heavy and long process, because it meant revising syllabus, it meant revising curriculum, it meant looking at teacher training. My question was to the region, since I think all of us have very similar political situations in our states, in our countries, where textbook rewriting and textbook development and disbursement is also a very politically volatile subject. And the whole process of revamping the system is also a heavy one. Just wanted to learn from you if there was some experience that can serve as a good practice, or something that can be taken to the government to help advocate for something. I mean, I know, Iqbal, you mentioned that it's a 7-year commitment that the government has made. I'm assuming assuming that the political system doesn't change in between the 7 years. So similarly, that's my question. If somebody has any nuggets of wisdom around this.
Can I come in?
Absolutely. Go ahead,
Okay,
Iqbal.
quickly. So actually, as I said, like if you want, we really want to go for this skill-based education, and then only one-dimensional work will not give it. Like even in Bangladesh from 2005, we work with life skill embedment, and in 2020, 11, 12, life skills are embedded in the formal curriculum, but it was completely a standalone intervention, and it was not implemented throughout the school. So it's a comprehensive approach that we need to take, and from the very beginning, from the conceptualization, if government is part of that, the way that we started in 2017, like we started work with the National Curriculum and Textbook Board. And when we started there, we realized that more than 20 organizations individually working with National Curriculum and Textbook Board to influence different type of skills embedment into the curriculum. Then we actually came up with the idea that let's bring all the people together and let's go outside Dhaka, think about for 3-4 days that what are the skills, what actually we want. That exercise give us a very clear realization that actually we want the same thing, but we want in a different way. And also the government pressure is also a different way. So actually that actually created the platform that we work together for a comprehensive framework first, what we actually want to integrate, and then start under the government leadership from the very beginning so that the ownership is there. And you see that no capacity building initiative was there because the whole process was under National Curriculum and Textbook Board with their technical people. So it is owned, led, and facilitated by them. We were just supporting, facilitating the process with the government. So I think this I can share with you the many examples for the last 2 years, the way it is now owned by the government, and our Ministry of Education, all 2 ministers actually owned it, and they are directly now guiding the whole process. And that is well accepted by the civil society organizations and development partners also at this moment. So it's actually the journey, and how they're definitely country specific, definitely contextual, and definitely depends on the whole overall approach. But so far, 2 hours journey, we are actually really doing well and going well under the leadership of the government.
Okay, thanks a lot, Iqbal. So very quickly, let me read the last question that is actually directed to Arjun in Bhutan. You have received several questions from fellow Bhutanese on the issue of teacher training. So basically, I'll read a question from sorry, Dorji, who asks, are teachers competent to teach competency-based learning in Bhutan? In many cases, teachers were not well trained or perhaps untrained and outnumbered. Many teachers do not understand how to manage and teach students in the first place and forsake quality in the process. So Arjun, if you can address that question just let us know a little bit how you're thinking on teacher training for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the good question. Well, while we travel on the journey of 21st century competencies, we have realized we need to train our teachers on handling 21st century competencies. Second is we need to incorporate 21st century competencies in our curriculum. When we have competencies in our curriculum, those are expected to be delivered in the classroom. So when you do not have competence in the curriculum framework, when you do not find this process in the curriculum framework, the thing doesn't happen. Third one is the assessment system, whether the assessment system is ready to measure those 21st competencies or not. So the three triangles here are very important. The first one is the curriculum, the second one is the teacher, the assessment body, as well as the teacher training centers. Are they teaching competency-based pedagogical practices in their colleges? So this is very important component to address 21st century competencies. While in Bhutan, I'm sure I was part of the bigger group where we have ventured into called transformative pedagogy. So we brought this concept of KIX structure, cooperative learning structure, and we have given the workshop to all the teachers in Bhutan to go for transformative pedagogy. That was a big, big problem to address competencies. In KIX structure, we can find all the pedagogical practices. If you really wanted to try out some pedagogical, then we have given the structures. So I'm sure it is there, but only thing would be probably our teachers need again rehoning. Probably we need to add more values on that, and I'm sure it will be achieved in the coming days.
Thanks a lot, Arjun. So now I'll head back to Mark to introduce our next session.
Thank you very much, Marina, and a big thank you to Frank, Iqbal, and Arjun for those excellent interventions and information from South Asia. Lastly, I'm pleased to welcome with us Professor Esther Kerr from the University of Melbourne. Esther has been a longtime collaborator with us here at UNESCO Bangkok and the NECMAP network, working on what we call transversal competencies and how we can assess transversal competencies or 21st century skills. Esther's got a lot of experience throughout the globe, through Asia, through Africa, and we're pleased to hear more from her on some of the issues and challenges in terms of the alignment of these competencies. So without anything further, Esther, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I'm going to talk reasonably briefly about some of the major points that reflect what's been talked about by our colleagues from the countries. And then I'm going to spend time on some of the critical issues which are raised by the competency-based teaching and learning come transversal competency shift. And so as Mark just referred to, I might call them 21st century skills. I may refer them to as transferable skills or transversal competencies, but typically I'm talking about the same thing. The shift reflects, as we all know, I think, a move from memorization and rote learning to application and use of learning. So a decision for countries has been to identify what matters most for their students. And of course, that varies. So if you look at the right-hand side of this screen, you can see some examples of countries which have identified particular sets of skills for integration into their basic education curriculum. Notice that there are some differences in the generality with which they list the skills. So for example, we have self-efficacy here, which is relatively specific, while here we can see intrapersonal. And presumably intrapersonal would also include something like self-efficacy. So there are differences in the way different countries express their valuing of the different skills. So apart from that, though, you can see that there's quite a lot of commonality as well as some differences. I actually wonder what you're hypothesizing about which these countries are, and maybe you have identified some of them. So just because it's quite fun, these are the particular countries that are in this group: Australia, Kenya, Nepal, and Indonesia. So one issue, however, when we look at these sort of labels for skills or competencies, is to understand that the translation of the terms from the national language to English does not always do it justice. And I think that's particularly the case here for Indonesia, where the English translation doesn't quite capture some of the more holistic concepts and skills. Another issue around this, of course, is a question about what is a skill. And it might well be that some of these are values or attitudes rather than skills. It's another big discussion to have. The second main point that I want to talk about a little is this one of alignment. And of course, in the chat, we've seen this constant questioning about teaching. And so it's what we need to think about is, and many of you will have seen this before if they've listened to any of my, my talking before, the nature of the learning goals is the central point, and that dictates how you review your curriculum, how you look at different assessment strategies, and how you think about the best pedagogical strategies. Now, and then of course, each of those mechanisms, those education mechanisms, need to link up with each other so we get alignment. And we've been talking about that a great deal, particularly out of UNESCO Bangkok. On the right-hand side, you can see another set of example countries. And I want to emphasize I've subjectively identified the rollout of their transversal competency shift as well as their competency-based shift across these different areas of aspiration. In other words, have they said they want to move in this direction? Have they looked at pedagogical supports? Have they looked at curriculum reform? What's happening around assessment? Is assessment in the classroom happening, or is assessment at large scale happening? And you can see that there's two areas there that are pretty much common across all. And our colleague from Afghanistan identified this early on, that nearly everybody moves on curriculum reform. And of course, they do that typically simultaneously with saying this is the way we want to go. But then we find that these other areas typically lag behind. And the reason that I've separated out assessment at the classroom level and assessment at the large scale assessment level is because what I've seen generally is there's a great deal more movement on the large scale assessment side than there is in the classroom. And this might come back to some of these concerns about how do you assess these sorts of competencies. And I believe you can do that, and you can do that in the classroom, but you can see that countries are spending very different amounts of time and effort around it. So it's great to align formative assessment, classroom assessment with the nature of the skills. It's great if you run large-scale assessments that describe the skills, but there's another issue about assessment and its downward pressure in examination systems that I'll come back to later. And these are just the countries that are sitting behind those labels. So I think there is a conundrum around this. We go through all of these processes that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. We get frameworks since 1980 from multilaterals saying that we need to move in a more humanist way. We get workforce predictions about the fact that we're not equipping our students with the skills they need. We get mission statements from all of the individual countries. We know that there are different approaches to the integration of the skills into curriculum and teaching. And there's this growing awareness of the need for alignment. But are there challenges that are more broad than just implementation? And naturally, I believe there is, which is why I've asked the question. So notwithstanding all of these stimuli, do we have some other gateways that we need to go through? So I've identified here some. If you read some of the work out of UNESCO Bangkok and the NEC map and the AreaNet research that they've done, you'll see that they've identified 3 categories of challenge to competency-based assessment transversal competencies: the definitional, the operational, and the systemic. And I really want to look at these systemic ones. So we can see 3 of them here. The traditional education system has a focus on knowledge, and we've heard that referred to already today. And that focus on knowledge often leads to congested curricula. And I know there are colleagues online whom I've seen who are very, very aware of how congested curricula has led to reform in their countries. Then we have the prioritization of academic success. That typically is seen through high stakes examination that directs where people will go. It directs what their opportunities are. And again, those exams have downward pressure. And then the final point is this one about a discipline-based education structure, where our education systems are organised according to subjects. So subjects lead the way we timetable. Subjects lead to whether students do one subject or another once they get into any choices. It divides the academic fraternity into different groups. So what I'm going to look at is the first 2 in combination, because they tend to act together, and then look at this discipline issue. So one of the implications, and I've seen a mention of this in the chat too, one of the implications of moving to a competency-based teaching, learning and assessment model is that you automatically move to criterion-based or criterion-referenced assessment. If we put the competency-based approach together with 21st century skill, that absolutely shifts us towards criterion referencing. So criterion referencing meaning when a student is assessed, what we're interested in is identifying what he knows and can do in line with the curriculum to which he's exposed. So that's quite different from norm referenced, in which case students are compared with each other. So it's a philosophical shift as much as it is a technical shift. And norm referenced assessment and the philosophies that underpin it have traditionally filled the role of providing a path to success, further education, higher socioeconomic status. And we see this most visibly in things like the image you can see there. We see it in high stakes examinations, lists of rankings of who is the top and who is the bottom. This is comparative rather than it is criterion referenced. So if we're going to introduce 21st century skills and competency-based teaching and learning in the basic education sector, we need to think about how that links with the nature of examinations at the end of the basic education experience, as well as back through it. Because at the moment, it's the traditional approach to assessment that provides entry to further learning and opportunities. So how do we change the system such that current bottlenecks allow graduates from a new competency-based assessment, 21st century skills focus to progress? This is another way of looking at really at the same issue. So if you look at the vertical here, I'm saying the younger children are down here and the older children are up here. So we more frequently tend to find some of the competency-based formative assessment models, 21st century skills in the early years and in the primary years, gradually moving up through the secondary system. But initially, we often find it introduced in the early years. On the other hand, at grade 12, at the end of grade 12, we've got these final examinations exerting downward pressure. So we have a mismatch between what is being valued in the early years and how they are graduated from the system at the other end. So we need to work out how to build an alternative evaluation system that values learning, that encourages learning, so that then we can ensure that we don't get a mismatch between the different models. I've lost my mouse somehow. Where's it gone? There you are. Here's just a quick example of downward pressure. I'm aware that we're running a little bit slow on time. So this is just an example of this negative downward pressure of examinations. We can see here 4 countries, all of which have tried to make changes in the focus of their education system. If you just read a couple, Japan, moving from what students know to what they can do. And in Singapore, the idea of teaching less, learning more. So all very familiar approaches in terms of 21st century skills focus and competencies. We can see some of the issues arising, that we have community concerns about academic standards, and we find that across many of the countries that are trying to make a move. And then in all of these, we basically find that there is a downward pressure from the university entrance exams. They are not aligned with the nature of the education system that we're setting up now, as we want our students to value learning as opposed to performing on tests. The final point I want to make is around this one of silos, school organisation, that at the moment we organise our schools around subject disciplines. If we're introducing competency-based assessment, if we're introducing 21st century skills, then we need to have some common language across the different subjects. Rather having all of these subjects sitting in their own little boxes, we need to have some transfer of learning. That means we have to help teachers understand, how do you teach these competencies? How do you assess them, and use similar approaches so that the students can actually see the commonalities across what they're learning, so that they learn actually to transfer. So one approach to monitoring, I won't go into it because I know we're really short on time, but recently we've been piloting an approach to the, I'm really sorry about the birds. They're outside and I can't do anything about it. So I hope
we're getting some sound coming in, so I just want to stop you. So you can, don't lose your mind and see if we can't get that sound to come back off.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I'll leave.
Just a second. See if, okay. Please go ahead, Esther.
Okay, sorry. So what we have here is one approach to monitoring and therefore supporting teaching and learning. The framework is about learning opportunities. And if we're going to ensure alignment, then we need to ensure that across teaching and learning, assessment and accountability, and the enabling environment, both the system and the school and the classroom teacher are all in sync. And there'll be more news about this in time, but at the moment, what this comes from is a pilot of an SDG 4.7.6 indicator, and Bhutan was one of the pilot countries in this particular project. And I hope that you'll have a look at that URL to find out more about this approach, because it very much rests on 21st century skills. And then another international initiative there associated with 21st century skills, which is being run by IEA, which is around curricular structures into which 21st century skills will be integrated, looking at commonality of definitions, descriptions of skills, and providing us with some information about the proficiencies of students. I'm very sorry about the background noise, and I'll just stop there now. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. So let me directly...
Go ahead, go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you. So let me directly open our floor to questions. Thank you. Esther, would you like to respond to that one? Or anyone else, any of the previous presenters can also jump in.
Sure, I think it's a very useful point, and thank you for making it. You're quite right, of course. We're not talking only about transferable competencies, we're talking about subject-specific competencies, but we still need to differentiate between what is subject-specific knowledge or content and subject-specific competency. And so if we think about how a student manipulates, uses, adapts, or builds on subject-specific knowledge, then that is more of a transferable competency. In other words, we're asking the student to apply their critical thinking, their problem solving, or their communicative capacities to subject-based content. And in fact, I'm not recommending in any way that one should ever think about 21st century skills in isolation. We're only interested in them in terms of how they can facilitate our learning, how they can facilitate our adaptation and our flexibility and the ability to act in non-routine ways to deal with new situations. So thank you for clarifying. That was great.
Thank you, Esther. So now let me read a question that I received from Shehzad Jiva from Pakistan, who asks, is there any successful example of an implementation assessment of competency at the national level?
If I could just briefly answer, successful, I think, is a difficult word to deal with. I think that what we should be thinking about is, have we been able to assess and get results that appear to be valid for purpose? So in other words, if I'm interested in measuring problem solving, have I been able to assess problem solving either in a classroom-based task or at the national level? And my answer is, I think, yes, there are countries that have done that. I think the Philippines has gone a good long way toward it. And I think Nepal also has done some work, particularly around the skills like problem solving and critical thinking. The issue, of course, is that those cognitive competencies are a lot easier to assess than some of the social competencies. You might like to look at the Optimizing Assessment for All project that we recently completed at Brookings. If you just put Optimizing Assessment for All into a browser, you should find it. And we've done quite a lot of work there also on communication and collaboration. There's no doubt that these are more difficult, but it's clear that we can get there. So anyway, my short answer is yes, there are countries that are making good way in measuring some of these competencies.
Thank you, Esther. So for the sake of time, let's just address one last question. And that question came from Timo Stola from UNESCO Myanmar. He asks, beyond downward pressure, what are the findings on other pressures on teachers, schools, and education from high-stakes examinations? So any presenter can respond to that.
Esther, you please go ahead. I'll let you take a first stab at that. I know you have a lot to say on that, and I can follow up if you'd like.
No, actually, Mark, I was thinking that you would take it because I know that you've done a great deal of work on this. And so one of the references that I provided there, the book on culture of testing, or the report on culture of testing that Mark led at UNESCO Bangkok, provides quite a lot of very interesting information about some of those negative outcomes. So Mark, over to you.
No, thank you, Esther. You did briefly touch upon them. This downward pressure of high stakes exams is extremely critical, as you see, as learners get older. You know, the one point that Esther brought up is that originally curriculums become more packed with more and more subject content and knowledge expected to be learned. But then as you get older and you get to those high stakes exams, to some extent, the opposite actually happens. And that as learners start to prepare for those high stakes exams, the curriculum becomes much, much narrower. And you're only focused on looking at those specific subjects that are needed to pass that extremely important exam. In most cases, those high stakes exams don't cover all subject content, only specifics, mathematics, one of the key sciences perhaps, language. And so all of learners' times in, for example, secondary school, or much of their time becomes focused on a few key subject content areas. And it's really hard to explain to parents and the community and the students the importance of these other competencies. I know a question came through the chat box at one point of, what do the parents think of all this? And that is a key issue and a key challenge for many places. No matter how hard ministries of education try, no matter how hard teachers try, a lot of times students and parents don't see the benefit because they have that high stakes exam facing them at the end of education. So they don't see the value in all of these holistic competencies, these intrapersonal competencies that are hard to assess. So that's a good point. Thank you very much for the question. There's more useful information in the book, or we're happy to share information on that in the future. Marina, anything else from your end?
No, thank you, Mark. And thank you, Esther, for the excellent responses, and to all presenters. I think we can now hand over to José Luis for some final messages.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. Thank you, José Luis, and everybody from our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And so we are near the end of the webinar, which is the last webinar of this year, the 5th in our 2020 KIX webinar series. On behalf of NORRAG and the KIX EAP Hub team, I want to thank UNESCO Bangkok for partnering with us today. We are also very thankful to all our speakers and moderators. You made this webinar truly a knowledge and exchange session. To the team in the background, the interpreters, Elita and Jablil, and to our KIX EAP team, Paul, Marina, Hoy, Veronica, thank you, as well as to Professor Gita Steiner-Ramsey, who has been guiding us through all this process. I said this is the last webinar of this year, but the KIX EAP webinar series will return early next year. We see our webinars as an opportunity to enhance the concrete and practical use of education global public goods for policy and planning. We want to make knowledge useful for you in your countries. We'll continue to have open access webinars in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Russian, and all the recordings are available in our website. Our KIX EAP Hubs offers more than just webinars. We'll be offering to all the KIX EAP countries our second learning cycle early next year, which is a professional development opportunity to national education experts from the 21 KIX EAP countries to work on policy analysis and innovation exchange. All our activities are designed to respond to thematic priorities identified by you in your countries, so that we can promote the use of knowledge for education system strengthening. To ensure that, we want to hear from you how we can respond to your demands. So in each one of your countries, there is a national KIX coordinator and a national KIX steering committee to voice out your national priorities. And we are willing also to learn how we can do better. So please fill out the evaluation survey that is now being shared in the chat. Our Europe Asia Pacific Hub is one component of the overall KIX initiative that is made possible by the Global Partnership for Education and the International Development Research Center from Canada. We look forward to continue working with you all in building knowledge and innovation exchange in your region. Our journey does not stop today, it's just starting. Thank you and see you all very soon.